Okay, good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today is Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. The BPDA is continuing to host public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. My name is Seth Reisman. I'm Deputy Director of Design Review at the BPDA. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purpose of the record, Commissioners Haseen, Gillies-Smith, Lubenow, and Sykes are present, and we should be joined by Commissioner Love. Tonight's proceedings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, followed by comments from BCDC commissioners, followed by public testimony. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 10 minutes. I will give presenters a halftime and 1 minute warning. With that, unless we have any questions or comments from the commissioners, we're ready for the first proponent team to present. So Brett and team, if you want to put the presentation up, I will stop sharing. And as they put that up, this will be the second presentation of the proposed project at 2 Charlesgate West in the Fenway neighborhood of Boston. This will be the second presentation to the Design Committee following an introduction at the March 5th monthly meeting and a Design Subcommittee meeting on April 16th. Commissioners Gillies-Smith, Kotaridis, and Ron were present at the most recent BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting. It is my understanding that Commissioner Love is recused from review. Are there any others that I have missed? Okay. With that, I invite the proponent to begin speaking once I have invited you to unmute yourself.
All right, great. Thank you, Seth. Pull up the presentation here. Good evening, commissioners. Oh, if you could also enable screen sharing, Seth, that'd be great.
That would help. Can you try it again?
Still says it's disabled.
Okay. Apologies, hold on. Okay, how about now? Okay, we see the screen, but you might be back on mute, Brett.
There we go. Thank you, Seth. Thanks, commissioners. Thanks for your patience while we got through that. We are here to talk about 2 Charlesgate West. As Seth said, we were in front of you in March and had a subcommittee meeting with you all in April. Just as a quick reminder here, we are proposing 400 units of rental apartment housing, which will include 68 units of on-site affordable housing. And we're located right here at the intersection of Charlesgate, Boylston, and Ipswich streets. As a quick refresher to everybody, this site is an extremely unique site. We're extremely humbled to be proposing a project on this site. It really sits at the hinge point between all of the parkland along the Charles River, along Commonwealth Avenue, and the entrance into the Emerald Necklace. It also sits at the intersection of all of that kind of 19th century urban planning, along with the high spine, a kind of 20th century idea of concentrating more height along the Mass Turnpike. And our massing is really trying to respond to this context. In addition, there are both baked into the zoning from the early 2000s, these gateway parcels in the Fenway neighborhood, the Pierce being one, this site being the other, but also these kind of what we're calling gateway moments into the Fens and into the Fenway neighborhood that are articulated by buildings that have a higher building height and more special architecture. And we're trying to be responsive to this context in a sensitive way, given the parkland that's surrounding this site. The massing is really organized into 3 components, which we're going to go through each one tonight. A low bar that aligns in massing and materials with its pre-war neighbors along Boylston Street, a taller building oriented along Ipswich, and then a bustle which kind of buttresses that taller element. And what we're proposing is this public stair, this connection between Ipswich Street and the Emerald Necklace, which we're really intensely focused on making that an extremely special and beautiful space for the city. We're here to talk about some of the design updates with all of you. These are all of the comments that we received in the process of going through BCDC. I wanted to kind of summarize these over on the right, and we're going to go through each of these tonight. One is to clarify the landscape concept and its relationship to the public space and the building design, to make the public stair more special and more integrated with the energy of the Fenway, but also the materials in the Emerald Necklace. Looking at that lower massing along Boylston Street in a contextual but contemporary way, understanding that mid-rise bustle and how it's contributing to the overall design, and then looking at some of the details of the high-rise massing and how it contributes to the skyline. So we're going to start with the landscape concept and the public stair, and I'm going to let Emmett take it away from here.
Sure. Thank you, Brett. This is a slide you've seen before, but as we began to look at it in more detail, we've really begun to hone in on that bottom right image, which is a Roxbury pudding stone. So the Roxbury pudding stone makes up the bedrock of a lot of this area. It's seen all throughout the Emerald Necklace, both as natural outcroppings and as a building material. It also has this really unique composition of rocks and pebbles that are suspended within the stone. So conceptually, we wanted to play with this idea at multiple scales of stone suspended or scattered through the landscape. We have 3 main design goals. Enhance what is currently a very vehicular-oriented experience on Ipswich, create a key link between Ipswich and Boylston with the public stair and elevator, and create a compatible edge along the park site. So at the Boylston level, we've cut down on the hardscape area and further defined the building entrance. This also makes the stair access feel more public. We've further developed the idea of this pudding stone-like boulders and stones set within the landscape, where large stones are suspended in the landscape. Some are set flush in the paving, while others become these natural seating elements. I also want to highlight the entry to the public elevator, as well as the public restroom that's being proposed. These large natural stones carried down the stairs and onto Ipswich Street. This not only unites the site, but it also serves as a really nice wayfinding element. We also see here the entry to the elevator. We've made a substantial change to the building to open up that corner, which Brett will speak to in a little bit. And we've also made some changes to the configuration of that stair wall, which we'll get into in a later slide. At the Boylston level, the additional plantings here kind of frame the residential entry and cut down on the amount of hardscape at this level. This also makes the stair and the elevator connection feel like the primary movement through the site. And then we've been working really hard on the public stair in response to your comments. These are a number of sketches that we generated that for one reason or another did not make the cut. But if we move to the next slide, you can see that.
And you're at about halfway.
Thanks. We've broken down the scale of the wall, introducing a lower planter that matches the language of the historic wall. We've pulled back the upper wall a little bit to introduce a second layer of vegetation. We also think this might be a nice art opportunity. And then you can see at the top there, the windscreen. We're hoping to really dematerialize that as much as possible so that it recedes and doesn't read as part of the wall. And then on the building side, you can see some of the modifications to that corner that make the stair feel really public and visible. And I'll let Brett talk to those a little bit further. I think Brett might be muted again.
Thank you, Seth. Sorry, I won't keep muting myself. So Emmett, just to take it away from there, the building changes here, we've really opened up this corner, which you can see in this floor plan, so that we have created both an outlet for the stair to Ipswich Street, but also a way to kind of do a shortcut or cut that corner underneath the building, and really try to open up this stair as much as we can to the experience of Ipswich Street, and make it a more dynamic experience. As Emmett was explaining, we are kind of preserving that granite bridge embankment and then proposing a wall up above it that is partially existing and then partially new that will form a kind of windscreen, and we think can host a really wonderful graphic that will speak to some of the energy of the Fenway and serve as a kind of wayfinding element in the neighborhood. These are some of the stair sections. We continue to refine the grading to make that stair as comfortable as possible to traverse. We've introduced 2 landings so that they're never above your eyesight, and it always feels like that stair is something that's comfortable. But again, there's a lot of grade to traverse there, over 13 feet. And then this is that view of the stair looking the other direction. So moving on to the building, we want to kind of focus in on 3 components here. One is the Boylston bar, the other is the tower, and then that bustle supporting element. Looking at the Boylston bar, all of the pre-war neighbors along Boylston, they have a very consistent street frontage of bay windows and these horizontal lines that kind of repeat all along the street. At our building, there is an important gap that is governed by an easement that we can't really build into. And so that it gives us a moment to have some relation of the Boylston, of our Boylston wing to its neighbors, and pick up on some of the elements like this entry moment that is enlarged and some stone detailing around that, as well as the proportion and spacing of the windows, but also make it a more contemporary expression of the building design that feels comfortable with its neighbors without mimicking them. We have, quite honestly struggled with some of the massing and formal qualities of that Boylston wing. Here are just some of the examples that we've looked at. We think that landing on something that's more simple, that reflects the kind of percentage of window to wall ratio that's on the neighbors, again, without mimicking it, is the right move for us. And, we're imagining that this box is going to be a very finely detailed brick box with some corbelline details, some red stone incorporated into it, so that it feels, again, materially very comfortable with its neighbors, but still stands apart just a bit. We then want to move on to the bustle, and a bustle is another area that we've been working very hard on and have had many iterations of it. Where we've landed is that the bustle should feel something that's a little more lattice-like, something that is more open. It uses the tectonic language of the tower that is more clad in brick, but has a lighter material palette. So you can see on this zoomed in view, we're proposing a perforated metal rain screen that's backed up by a solid panel behind it. It's articulated with bronze-toned metal trim around the window, something that is akin to the taller tower next to it, but also with these material moves tries to help it recede while being related to the overall tower.
You have about a minute left.
All right, I'll go fast, Seth. And then walking kind of around the tower, this is a view from Lansdowne Street that presents the very narrow profile of it. And then the view from the north, this is your view coming in from Starrow Drive, where some of that same perforated metal picks up at the top of the building as a screen. You can see some of the detailing of that tower where the facade folds in and out gently while the window wall plane stays quite flat. And that gives us an opportunity to incorporate more of that bronze-toned metal panel trim that gives the facade a sense of movement. And then some views from around different vantage points in the city here with the building over here. And then there was a question of the view at night. Overall, we really want the building to feel like it is receding as much as it can. It should feel like a quieter element in the landscape with a very kind of active ground floor plane that feels warm and inviting and vibrant. And then an idea at the top of the building that there might be some lighting element that just marks this very subtly at night in the skyline. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, team. Commissioners.
I haven't, go ahead, yeah, go
No.
ahead, Commissioner.
Actually, I think why don't you go first, Kirk? And I'll talk about the landscape, but I don't know if that should follow, or go ahead.
Doesn't matter. I mean, we can start. I was going to say whoever was in the last meeting
Yeah.
might be helpful to get a recap. So, David, I don't know, were you in that meeting?
No, I wasn't. So I
Okay.
mean, I'm sorry, Seth. There was a subcommittee meeting, correct, on this
Correct.
already?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
so-
Shauna was in the previous meeting.
And Anne-Marie, I think you were in the subcommittee meeting as well, Anne-Marie, correct?
I don't believe so. I saw the first version, the full commission. I don't believe I was in the second one.
Oh, okay.
That's
So
our records.
So it was me only. So I know that Brett gave a a quick but I think accurate recap. From an architectural perspective, there, from what I recall, the focus was really the character of the bustle as the major component of the architectural discussion, and then from the landscape perspective, I think this was also pretty accurate about that the concept wasn't clear, that the public stair, a lot of the architecture discussion as well was about the publicness of the stair. So I can, without going through these notes again, I can start talking about the landscape. And thank you very much, Brett, for the presentation. I also really appreciate some very significant differences from not only from the last presentation, which I'll go through, but from the draft presentation. A number of the concerns I had looking at the draft presentation were addressed in the presentation that you gave today. So from my perspective, I think that the big moves of the landscape have been addressed pretty significantly. I think that moving just starting at the top, moving the Boylston side, moving the blue bikes out to the more public side instead of tucking them in against the building, I just think it makes it simpler. It's cleaner. It makes movement through the whole space easier. I think that the biggest move on the project, and I'm sure from a landscape perspective, is the cutting back of the Ipswich the diagonal connection, that big connection through. A lot of the discussion was how to make this stair feel public. It feels like geometrically it's more or less in the same place. I mean, we could go to the view of this. So first we could actually, yeah, this view, and then I think, I don't know if you had that same view that you had in the draft presentation from the right-hand side. Yeah, I think this makes it feel very porous. I think cutting that chunk of the building out is a pretty significant difference to the feeling of publicness of this stair. I also, let's go back to one of the other views where we're looking at the bench, and this is a big difference from what I looked at earlier today, where this stone piece on the left-hand side has now been dropped down to lower than eye level. I'm not 100% sure it's there yet, but I think that as an overall gesture, and I think also the different layering of the wall components, shifting them, the windscreen being backed off. The windscreen, I'm assuming, is also the guardrail. Has made a pretty big difference to the feeling of lightness of this stair. I also, is that the same stone continuing into the interior of the building?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
In this area right here.
Yeah, which I think is also a nice connection, a nice feeling of connecting and opening it up so that stair feels even bigger than quite a bit bigger than it did in the last rendition of it. I think that the detailing, like the way that what the particular stones are doing, the idea of if the stones fit into this amphitheater stair, I'm not sure if you're going to get that through disabilities or not, but I love that idea. I think those things haven't quite been worked out, as well as the specifics of the streetscape. But generally, I think that the landscape has made significant improvements, mainly just making it easier and simpler, and clarifying the material characteristics of it.
Do you want to, should we go through our comments and then come back, circle back? Would that be most useful? I mean, Kirk, I think you wanted to go next. Or I can go, or anyone. Well, maybe I'll jump in. Everyone can hear me, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Why don't you go ahead, David?
It's like-
I
it's
have
like
some thoughts
silence.
too. Why don't you go
Okay.
ahead?
All right. First of all, I thank you for the updated presentation, and like always, from your firm, everything is very clear. So I appreciate that. I think that to echo Shauna's comments about the ground plane, I think opening up that corner and letting the architecture slip through this feels much more inviting, much more successful as a major move on the ground plane relative to the Emerald Necklace than I think where you were before. So I'll resist commenting on that and let Shauna's remarks speak for mine. On the building itself, I have two thoughts. Given the nature of the gateway discussion, and I've been thinking about this a lot for other reasons, the gateway discussion about the nature of your building, I think that in some ways, I think the piece that relates to the historic fabric needs to really needs to calibrate very well to that run of buildings, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in 1 second. And then the nature of the tower itself, I think if it's a gateway building, the question in my mind, and maybe this is a discussion that you've had with the BPDA staff and so forth, is, shouldn't a gateway building actually be not quiet, but actually a little bit more of a celebratory moment? And I think you and Brett, you described it as trying to really be quiet, really sort of recede, if you will. And I guess I'm questioning that impulse relative to its prominence on that site, and whether, in fact, by the way, I think the evolution of the skin and so forth seems like it's very exciting. It's going to catch the light. It's going to be interesting. It's, for me, more about the shape and the resolution at the top of the building. It feels in some ways to me too much like a building that could be found elsewhere in the city in terms of its form and finish, if you will, at the top, and not enough of a gateway gesture. And I don't know what I mean by that exactly architecturally, but it's a question, and that's in part a response to how you yourself describe the building. And then if you could show a view down the view of the brick building, which I think is in many ways a very handsome response to the run of architecture down there. Coming from, I think one perspective that I have here is that I would like this so much more if the brick section of the building calibrated exactly to the height of the buildings of the run that it's relating to, not jumping up a little bit, which emphasizes the disconnect, emphasizes the fact that the windows aren't aligning, emphasizes that the horizontal lines and stuff like that are their own thing. I think that extra 8 feet or whatever it is that's happening up there is very distracting to me from the perspective of what I think you're trying to accomplish and are very, in my mind, very close to accomplishing. And it has very little to do with the language of the architecture and mostly to do with the specific height. And that, for me, is a lesson learned in European cities, right? Where there are many historic buildings sitting side by side, very many contemporary buildings. But boy, oh boy, that height is absolutely calibrated from building to building. And it makes that relationship of new to old and the strength of the big urban move very, very clear. So those are, I mean, those are the two things that I'm struggling with. One is that in my mind, the need for that more careful calibration in some way, either it's the banding of the building or it's just very simply the cornice height. And then the larger question about what does this building mean on the skyline as a gateway?
And just to piggyback on David's comments, I would agree that, you know, what is really unique about this building, and again, as my colleagues have, I really appreciate the clarity of your presentation. And when I look at the gateway moments, you know, the diagram, I think it's, at least in my version, it's slide number 3, if you could pull that up. What, you know, really is unique about this site is it serves as a hinge point in many ways. It marks a gateway to this part of the Emerald Necklace. I'm aware that Charlesgate is an area that the Emerald Necklace Conservancy has been investing, you know, is investing time and effort thinking about how to improve that connection. So, you know, and I appreciate also your diagrams on the next slide that show the evolution of the massing. So I think in general, the big moves, I would agree with David's comment about, you know, how you think about the bar building. But when I see the tower itself, it resembles so many other towers that we've reviewed in the city that often have different uses. And I think, you know, how does this express the fact that it's a marker, you know, it's a gateway, it's urban place, its place in the city is very different. This is residential, so this is not, it seems like you should have a little bit more flexibility in thinking about the floor plate of that building, rather than we see a lot of blocky buildings that are the life science infrastructure. So how can this respond more to its place, just as you are putting the same attention to the stairway and thinking about how the stairway provides that connection? How does this building provide the same, address the context within the skyline of the city, and the fact that it is wrapping, you know, it's transitioning between several different conditions. That's one piece too. I'd like to think about it. I'm not quite convinced about the bustle. I think I am in terms of the massing, but in terms of how the 3 portions of the building relate to each other, I think is an opportunity for refinement.
Yeah, I agree with comments that Anne-Marie and David have made. I actually think the stair has evolved very nicely, and I think the 2-story expression that you showed is an opportunity to spill light out onto the stair and to animate it and make it not feel even less tucked away. It's interesting, the contrast between these 2 images and the third one that you showed, if you go back 2 more. This one. So, you know, when it's rendered to be quite transparent and quite bright, it feels quite comfortable. And certainly when you elevate, it feels much more open. I think if it ends up being more opaque, sort of as this might express, as opposed to the next one, if you go to it, right here, it's rendered to go away, basically. You know, it's transparent glass, lots of light. It really feels like a continuation of that 2-story space, you know, for the whole elevation. I think this could be a very comfortable place. I think it could be a great addition. So I think you can resolve this. I think that the bigger challenge is this expression of Boylston Street, because in some ways is trying to straddle the proportions. And David, I agree with you. I think trying to be more faithful to both the datum, but also it's kind of a simplified version of some of the typology that you see to the left. And that because it is bridging to the simplified building that is the tower, I guess. But in doing so, it's proportionally bigger. It's kind of inflated in some way and maybe overly simplified. So it's not of either world, if that's making sense. And then I think the bustle is yet a third world. So, you know, I'm sorry I'm not giving you a more clear response, but I think you're hearing, you know, votes of confidence for your ground plane and still some challenges in your typology and expression of skin and proportion in bridging the environments you're dealing with between the height of the marker and the continuity of the brownstones. So I'll stop.
I think it would be, you know, I understand that as some of the issues in this development regard the negotiation of zoning, you know, shadows on the park. And it would just be interesting, I think, to understand where those fall in regard to this design. You know, is there an opportunity in looking at the design of the tower to possibly address some of those concerns? And I'm sorry if you've explained this before. I'm just kind of reflecting on the comments that we've just, you know, our comments so far and sort of how to, you know, knit the entire building together, because it almost feels, as I think to Kirk's comment, that it's being treated as three separate structures.
Anne Marie, I think that's a really interesting comment because, and by the way, I agree with Kirk as well that the brick building it's getting there, but it does feel it's not quite connecting yet, whether it's the scale of the openings or the height of the, you know, I think it needs another pass, like all the iterations that, well, I mean, you showed us many iterations, but maybe some of them should be revisited. But Anne Marie's comment about, you know, we've seen buildings that have been impacted that have had shadow impacts on the common become shaped by that shadow impact. And in fact, have made those buildings, I'm thinking of the Ritz Towers or, you know, some of those buildings, have made those buildings, frankly, much more interesting on the skyline as a result of having to shimmy and adjust and do what they can to minimize their impact on the building. And when you look at the building, you don't know that's why they're shaped that way. You just know that they're more sculptural. And I do think that as an exercise, there could be something interesting to see if what the idealized version of the tower and bustle might be if it were designed in reverse engineered, and then how you would potentially apply many of the same ideas that you've already developed onto whatever that study might yield. It's a question, maybe you've already done it, but it gets back to that issue of what's the Pierce, which is the building that I remember reviewing years ago at the other end when there was nothing on Boston Street and it was kind of by itself. And and part of what was appealing about that building was the shape of it, frankly, the strength of the marker that it created that was responding to the very particular urban conditions that it had. And it wasn't conventional in form like, you know, all the buildings that eventually marched down Boylston Street, and we understand why.
Can you actually go to slide, I think it's 21, the view from Boylston? Yeah, that one. It's interesting to me looking at that because that's where, to me, that's a view where I want to see it be, I think sculptural is a really good term, because here it looks like sort of three different buildings that are kind of making that change when in fact I almost want, and I say this very cautiously, I almost want the bar building to be taller there, because in fact this is a kind of a terminus of this view, or is that, how does this building begin to turn, because it is on a corner, how does the building actually turn, rather than being a series of rectangular masses that are kind of joined together? How could the bustle, address this view, kind of address the viewer looking at the building?
Brett, you're smiling, so I know you're thinking something. What what do you?
I wanted to give everybody a chance to, to have their comments. I appreciate them very much. I will say that the massing of this building has been highly negotiated among a lot of different stakeholders with many different points of views and priorities in terms of what's right for this site. It is a very sensitive site, like I said at the beginning, and there have been a lot of opinions about it for sure. Height is definitely a very sensitive topic about this building, and one that we have definitely tried many different iterations of this. I don't have in this slideshow the shadow studies queued up, or I could make you all dizzy by going through the deck to pull them up. To make a long story short, I will say that the massing of this building is calibrated to minimize shadows on the fens. In fact, there are no new shadows south of Boylston Street. So to the left of this view, there's no shadow impact of this building. But in order to do that and do all of the other things we need to do with the building to have a lower portion of the building fronting along the fens, there's a concern about the parks ordinance as it applies to this site and different approaches that we've explored with different stakeholders relative to that issue. All of that is to say, it is quite calibrated to both minimize shadows on the site, to respect the existing context, and also, quite honestly, to make it financially feasible to build housing on the site, which is not an easy thing to do in the city of Boston right now. And I think we're close. I mean, I appreciate all of your comments, and I mean, I think I would probably like to explore a couple of them a little bit more in detail. And maybe if we have a moment, I can go through them a little bit one by one. And I want to start with the Boylston wing, this low bar, because for us, our understanding of the pre-war buildings that are all along the stretch of Boylston Street, they are somewhat homogeneous in their kind of folding facades, their ins and outs, but they do actually have some diversity within them. They do step up as you move along Boylston Street. And there is one really key difference on our site, which is this gap, this kind of missing tooth between that very consistent fabric off to the left and then where our site begins. And as we've tested many of these versions of the building with bays, without bays, taller, shorter, the gap always gets in the way of making these specific alignments across the building because of the plane change, because of that trick of perspective as you're looking down the street. And so, David, I totally hear you about being more consistent about these lines, but I think in the totality along Boylston Street, there is precedent for these buildings stepping up, and we're trying to pick up on some of the cues, but also, reflect that those datums, the horizontal datums, they do step as you go along from the southern edge of Boylston up to the portion of the street where our site is.
Brett, I just have a quick follow-up question. Yeah. And I'm just putting this out, I'm not putting this out as a recommendation, just a pure question. Could the bar building then be taller than it is? Or is there, and I really do appreciate the very calibrated and negotiated part of this, but is that an option or is that not for one of the reasons you've described?
We've tried to keep the building under 70 feet. That's really the spirit of the Parks Ordinance in regulating the height of buildings along that edge. We have been, exploring different ways of how we approach the Parks Ordinance. So there might be a version of that where the 70 feet does not apply. I think those conversations are still ongoing. So I don't know, that was a kind of non-answer to your question, Anne Marie, sorry.
No,
Brett,
that's helpful, because I guess just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Finish your thought, Amber.
I just, because then in my mind, if for the reasons you explained, it cannot be more consistent with the other buildings, you know, one strategy might be to say, okay, then let's make it, let's use that as an opportunity to make it a little bit more different. Again, I'm not trying to make an argument to go this way. It's just kind of a one scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's interesting. It's a little bit betwixt and between right now, and I think that's my inclination would be actually a different one, which is if the when I looked at the studies that you just showed, the different studies that you had, I think one of the things that strikes me about the structure, if you will, of the existing block is these bays that are vertical that run from the bottom to the top. They run consistently up. And I think that with the building that the facade that you're proposing, you've registered a more horizontal expression that in my mind, and maybe that was to sort of bring the scale down, but in my mind, that actually exacerbates the problem. And if you looked at some of the studies that you showed us, where there was let's call it a bay expression that was vertically extruded all the way to the top, really the ones, let's say the one in the top middle, for example, I feel like that's more successful because it feels like and I actually kind of like it, to tell you the truth. And it's also nice for the units themselves, right? I mean, they would have the same quality and character that are probably prized in the apartments down the block, which is that sense of a bay window, being able to look up and down the fence, etc. But I find that much less dissonant with the existing fabric. The step up feels more like the other buildings, the way they feel that they step up on the block. So that for what it's worth, it's your building, it's not my building. But I would mention that feels like a more successful strategy and feels like it's a more modern interpretation of what exists already on that street.
I completely agree, because I think that's also, for all the practical reasons about, the more appealing the unit, but then also I feel that the flat facade makes me think it's suggesting more of a warehouse type building. So I think that again, I actually, when you showed this, my eye was drawn to the middle rendering on in the upper row.
It's really quite beautiful. And I mean, the more I look at it, the more I like it. But I don't know how you feel about it, Brett, or what drove you towards a flatter facade. But it feels to me like that whole calibration issue seems to go away for me in that scheme, because it's just such a much clearer idea.
And I think the beauty of it is then when I look at your tower facade detail, then
it relates.
To me, it addresses the relationship, not that they, are all identical, but it appears a little bit more harmonious.
Can you go back to the one before this that you were one before, one more back to the bustle? It's the one with the keep going, the one with the view over. Yes, okay. I think one of the challenges is the bustle's not going away. And I know we'd like it to go away, but I think some of the, and we're not here to design your building, but some of the interesting contrasts are this side of the building versus the other side. And I think I wonder, as you start to explore how to maybe do some of the things that Anne-Marie and Dave were talking about, as if it starts to be recognized in the geometry of the bustle facade, as opposed to just saying well, the bustle is just like the building behind it, but shorter, you know, and I think the other side of the building, in fact, could be very, you know, very much what it is. I just think that this side is an evolution out of some of the historical context as opposed to the modernist context. But anyway, we're doing too much talking maybe here, but go ahead.
Although if
No,
I could just, oh, go ahead. Just Kirk, I really appreciate what you just said, Kirk, because this image that we're looking at really highlights that we have the language of the bays along the street here, and then could that be expressed in the bustle, and then could that enable the bustle to be more sculptural as a result? Or, you know, how can this building begin to turn in some way?
Well, you
Right.
know, you guys are, I think, onto something here, which is, I think that maybe because of the discomfort that was expressed with the bustle at earlier meetings or whatever. I mean, by the way, I think it's very elegantly detailed, and I mean, you know, but I think that the instinct has been to try and minimize it, make it go away, right? Like make it recede into the rest of the building, and maybe that the bustle is the sculptural answer to the rather than the tower itself. Maybe the tower's fine. Maybe the answer is around the bustle, that the bustle is the indicator of an intermediate scale, something more structural, something that turns and is actually more present as a kind of stepping up to, you know, the tower than something that is conceptually recessive. And I don't know, but you know, I think that's what Kirk and Anne Marie were maybe alluding to, and I'm trying to be just sort of help you think about like where to focus. And I don't know, it could be that it's that piece is the piece that becomes actually something that is read against a curtain, right? Like it's the foreground piece to something that falls behind it, that is actually the quieter thing as you described it. And this is something that is a little bit more exuberant, that you see up and down the fens, and that is the almost the landmark piece.
Brett, could you explain the massing of the bustle, the height, width, you know, the decisions about that?
Sure. So the bustle is essentially our relief valve to, you know, make this project happen in terms of finding units in the building and calibrating the height of this. This building is actually 2 stories shorter than we presented it to the full commission in March. And that has been the result of a lot of pretty intense engagement with the neighbors in the state and many other stakeholders. And so in an effort to both preserve the public stair as an element that is open to the sky, which I think everybody has agreed is an important move, and also to keep the tower as short as possible and really, you know, try to calibrate the shadow impact of that to the turnpike and not have any impact on the fens. We kind of find ourselves, based on the geometry of the site, really, you know, trying to make this bustle do the heavy lifting in order for all these other components to come together. I think in our mind, it's an element that is actually a little bit quieter and that is kind of buttresses the taller tower. It's not visible from all views. I think the views that we've kind of selected to help illustrate the overall project are not all of the views you get. For example, if I go forward to Lansdowne Street, it's, you know, quite minimal, and given the grain of the city, a lot of the views from a distance are going to be this short view of the tower, other than, you know, if you're in Cambridge looking at the north side of it. So we're trying to get everything kind of perfectly calibrated here. David, I appreciate your comment about it being more sculptural, and maybe that it still is that component that picks up on some of the or is the, what should I say, the kind of counterpoint to the quietness of the lower bar and the tower. I do think that the tower overall in terms of its massing and its shaping. I think it wants to be quiet, given its location, given its proximity to the Fens and the Emerald Necklace and views from Commonwealth Avenue, that to be too energetic with the shape of it doesn't feel like it's the right move to me, that it really does kind of want to recede and feel like it's been there for a long time and will feel very comfortable there in the future too, but still be very contemporary about the detailing of it and the expression of the architecture and the tectonics of it.
But I guess what I was trying to understand is it its height, the overall height of the bustle, was that determined by shadows? Was the width of the bustle determined by, you know, the room required configurations? Because there's something a little bit less, the massing isn't it's a little uncomfortable for me. I'm wondering if it, you know, it's a little taller, it's a little narrower, if there's something, and I mean narrower in the view that we're looking at right now. And so that's what I'm just trying to determine is what was the, it was taller
That's
at one
helpful.
point.
If you could leave that on for 1 second. That's super helpful to me.
It was taller and narrower. You know, it's been lower and wider. We've tried to, in the far left, actually over here, it became even deeper in plan. It extended further to the south. You know, it is all, you know, in full disclosure here, it's, you know, something we've been struggling with, and we're upfront with it. I do think that we're, you know, we're really close with it. And I think that this kind of lattice, like more airy treatment to it feels right to me, that it has the right kind of proportion in relation to the overall tower. We've tested versions of it where it's all brick, sometimes where it's gray brick, sometimes where it's the same color as the tower, sometimes where it's a contrasting color. None of those ever felt quite right. And so we're trying to make this feel a little bit more skeleton, I guess.
You know, I wonder, and then, I mean, obviously you need to process all this and think about it. I'm kind of intrigued by the image on the left in the context of what Anne-Marie was talking about a building that pivots, right? That's at a pivot point, that turns the corner, that suggests not a line, but like a point in a sense. And so you applied this like other kick, I guess, to the third piece, right? This like third piece. Have you studied the exact element that you have as a transition from the grid of the low-rise piece to the Boylston Street line, that it lives somewhere in between those two places instead of being so closely associated with the Boylston Street, which is what makes it boxy in a way. And I don't know, like, have you done that? Because it looks like it could be a really, maybe that's it, you know, maybe it's the way you've designed it and you've articulated it, but it shouldn't conform so rigidly to the Boylston Street configuration, which might help it actually on the long views too, be a little bit more like Boston, which is like this collection of boxes that are all kind of askew with one another.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell on the image on the right here that in that version of the building, the bustle did extend out. It kind of rotated off of the orientation of the tower. Maybe not quite enough in the way that you're describing it, David, that maybe it needs to rotate a little bit more. That's something.
Or the other way, you know, or the reverse.
We run into a site constraint when we do that because of the shape of the site. So we're quite, maybe I'll back up to the site plan. The site is shaped kind of like a home plate. And so we run in quite quickly the footprint of the tower, if you can see my cursor.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And because of that taper of the site, we just have no room to continue rotating in that direction.
Can you?
Well, the thought.
Yep.
Yeah, and I realize, I think, as David said, we should leave you to process this. I guess one question, like David, I was looking at that image on the far left and just thinking, is there an intermediate step between the tower and the bustle? That actually in this image comes forward. I don't know, again, if we run into one of the constraints that we've discussed, but is there a way that it can, almost cascade, not literally cascade, but again, it just feels, I'm looking for something, what would make it more sculptural? And is there something so it's less slab-like?
Another thing, and again, for your consideration, and you probably tried it, but I am not completely comfortable with it being set, not in this view, but in the other view, being set back one window from the edge of the building. And I don't know if you've ever looked at it aligning with the edge of the building on the left-hand side. Again, it might not be a good idea. I was just curious why, because it gives it a little bit more of a tacked on look when it doesn't align anywhere.
So you're talking about, Shauna, the window on the left there in this
Yeah.
image? Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, we did look at that. We had a version of that massing that we went through with BPDA staff, and I think the feedback was that it was better when the tower kind of came around this corner and felt a little bit more free of the bustle. So we have looked at that. Yeah.
I mean, that's to me one of the interesting things, but we should stop. But this is one of the interesting things about the Pierce, is that some of those volumes like sort of swing out, right? They swing off the main element. And it's not perfect or anything, but I just taking Shauna's comment and some of these other comments, is there a way of thinking about that very tight moment that is about the relationship of the bustle to the tower, to where it sits in the grid, that might release the pressure that the slab situation seems to be making people, or us at least, feel. It's just a question.
And this is Seth Reisman, if I could just chime in, because I think the project team and BPDA staff have similarly been struggling with what is the right relationship of the pieces to the whole, right, in this composition. And we commend the proponent for working through many options in this endeavor. And I think the challenge that we faced in this was, how do we maintain the integrity and sort of elegance and proportion of the main tower, right? Accommodate the additional square footage that's in the bustle, and keep that sort of secondary and not become the sort of dominant element here. And that gets into the conversation of receding versus not receding. So I think that's certainly something that continue to be explored. I think we're hopefully in the right neighborhood, but maybe not the right house. But I guess that's something I'd like to throw out there. And with that, should we move to public commentary? So I'm going to share my screen.
Yes.
I forgot there was going to be public commentary. You should have probably had it a while ago.
So at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. And so, commissioners, before we open it up to those folks in attendance here, we did receive via email earlier today a comment letter that I will spend 2 minutes reading into the record. I believe you have received other comment letters that were in your packet that we sent to you earlier. So the comment letter I'm going to read is from Marie Fukuda. Dear Commissioners, I am sorry I cannot attend the hearing on 2 Charlesgate West, but wanted to ask my comments be considered with the public testimony. I am a Fenway resident who has served on the IAG for this project and who holds great concern for the impacts of this project on our zoning and our parks. I understand at last month's meeting that the commission had not considered issues pertaining to more than 100% height increase sought above our gateway zoning, which already affords a generous 135 feet to the site, or the impacts of that disregard on our entire zoning article. I also understood that it might not consider the impacts of height and its relation to the design of the grand stairway, with the building pushed back and made taller to allow for a visual element or visual statement of the stair. The public realm impacts resulting from this project to our parks cannot be measured. They are going to be permanent and negative. So are the consequences to the disregard for our zoning article. We were presented with an arborist report for the project that does not read as any arborist report I have viewed in my decades-long work in open space. My particular concern is the omission of the fact that northern red oaks, which proliferate DCR parkland and Charlesgate East, are not a shade-tolerant species. There are other public realm issues that have yet to be explored, such as the focus on the stair while not addressing conditions of the public walkways and landscape on the approach from West Fenway's Boylston Street. But I have not been able to suggest mitigation when the larger issues of disregard for our parks, our zoning, and our community continue to drive this project. I am attaching my April comment letter to the BPDA, and while I know this is a project that will likely advance despite its permanent negative consequences, hope that the BCDC consider what this project is costing the community and evaluate public realm accordingly. Sincerely, Marie Fukuda. Okay, that was under 2 minutes. So I will now open it up to anybody else who would like to make a comment. Freddie Valley, please unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, it's Frederica Vikely.
I'm sorry about that, Frederica Vikely.
Right. Well, you know, I've said this before, but I'm not sure anybody ever hears it because there's not consistency in the BCDC people that are reviewing this. But basically the 300-foot tower is drastically out of scale for the other low-rise residences next to it. It's markedly out of context of the parkland, and it's drastically out of compliance of the zoning, which you've heard other commenters say. I know it's a gateway, but it was intended to be lower than the gateway at the Pierce building. And so it was zoned, it was just a year ago, I believe, that the zoning set the 135 feet. Or maybe 2 years. It was redone recently with Article 66 changes. So it's completely, as you know, out of compliance with the parkway protection regulations and all. But, you know, all we hear about is the damn stairs. Well, they're lovely, yes, but that is not the structure. The problem is that the tower's too high, and you're backing into the square foot of a financial model that does not do service to our neighborhood. It doesn't do service architecturally. I'm not sure that we have to buy the developers a financial model, because, you know, there are differences in return on equity. There's differences in ROE over years or decades, and sometimes centuries. But I think this is totally being ignored. And I find it a little bit ironic that up the street tonight, there's a meeting on how to streamline the Article 80 process. And I would like to suggest that maybe ignoring all the rules is the way to streamline the Article 80 process. I'm not in favor of it, but I see too much of it. And my larger concern that I think should be the BCDC's concern is what is the potential for this destroying our parkway, the parkway design and the way the parkways define the city of Boston. Opening up this kind of a door to these taller buildings in a parkway protection area zone that was obviously zoned to protect the parks is asking for the total demise of the parkways and a whole culture that the city stands to lose if it passes this kind of a radical architectural rendering.
Thank you for your comment. Next, I see Pam Beal.
Good evening. My name again is Pam Beal, and I'm a member of the IAG for this project. And I want to thank the commissioners and the proponents for a really good presentation tonight. The comments from the commissioners were very interesting, and I think the changes that they're talking about and the changes that have already been made are really, they all make great sense and are responsive to the comments made through the public process. And, you know, the materials, the ground plane, the stairs and Ipswich Street entrance are greatly, greatly improved. And I look forward to this project moving ahead with all of these changes and making it through the public process. We need the housing, we need the affordable housing, and all of the pieces that they've put together here make great sense. And everybody's working hard to make it comply with as many pieces of this puzzle as we can. And the work done to date is wonderful. And I really hope the project moves forward. And thank you again.
Thank you, Pam. Next, I see Kathleen McBride.
Hi, this is Kathy McBride. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm a resident of the Fenway. I've lived here for over 35 years and watched the development. I'd like to reiterate the points brought up by Marie in the letter that you read. This is 100% height above the gateway zoning. It seems like a very disrespectful work to the community and especially to the park system. As a gateway, I think one of the most important parts of Boston and their whole parks system is the sense of relief that the community members have. As a resident of 35 years, one of the reasons that many people moved here was the proximity to the parks. We are now working on a multi-million project, the Balker Overpass redo, which is going to open up that park system and finally allow us, the residents of Boston, to get back to the river, the Charles River. What will be there is this tower that is just too tall. It's going to block the views from the park, from the Fenway Victory Gardens, which is the oldest Victory Gardens and a historic site, and the Olmsted Gardens, which are historic sites. We cannot come back from this once we go this way. And I don't understand why we are always fighting to maintain the zoning heights. And I wish that the BCDC would respect that because they're there for a reason. We don't have the money to fight this. We're not corporate entities. We're residents who need, for our sanity, to see the sky once in a while and to enjoy our parks. It's very important that you consider the views from the parkland, from the Emerald Necklace, what it's going to look like from the river, and what a gateway really means. It's also, remember, it's a gateway into the Emerald Necklace, which is a cherished part of our city's history. Please don't block the sky from us, and please stop going over the zoned heights. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Next, I see Barbara Yun. Excuse me if I pronounced your last name wrong.
Jane, thank you so much, Seth. I would reiterate what the last speaker said. I work in the Fenway. I know you all worked very hard on this project. All three buildings are hideous. And the tower in particular is inappropriate. The stairs were a big improvement, I have to say. I think, particularly when you talked about the post-war block on Boylston, you saw how long these buildings are going to stand, how long these buildings are going to affect the character of a neighborhood. And I want you to think about that when you look at those three buildings. The tower's way too tall. The medium-sized building is terrifically flat. And the building that you felt would be more harmonious with the post-war buildings isn't. I think zoning is there for a reason. I think zoning's helped neighborhoods maintain their character. And this neighborhood has a beautiful character. And the Emerald Necklace should be defended at all costs because Boston is rapidly running out of green space. Thank you so much for letting me comment tonight.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there any additional public testimony? Okay, seeing no additional public testimony, I'd like to conclude this portion of the presentation. And I will stop sharing. Perhaps, Brett, you can bring your presentation back up to have for further commentary. And I would like to speak to a few comments that were made regarding zoning and my understanding of the existing zoning and context. And project team, please correct me if you hear something inaccurate. This was designated a gateway site as part of the larger West Fenway neighborhood rezoning. A number of years ago, it was set to a height of 135, whereas the height of the gateway on the other side was set higher where the Pierce is today. I believe the Pierce was realized at a higher height than its original zoning as well. When BPDA and BPDA Urban Design and BPDA zoning compliance staff took a look at this proposal, we weighed both the existing zoning, the intent behind it to create a gateway moment here, as well as its contextual environment, both in relationship to the many ecosystems that it sits in, not just the Emerald Necklace and the Fens, but Ipswich Street, the critical nature it plays as a visual hinge and connector, but as well as a physical connector between the lower elevation of Ipswich Street and the upper elevation of the park. And we believe that this is a contextually appropriate height response, both with the lower bar relating to the residential adjacent to it, and the taller bar being sort of akin to some of the towers that are along the Mass Turnpike here, and really mark at the citywide scale, and respond to the immediate context of the highway on that side of the site. There was also mention of the parks ordinance, which does limit heights immediately abutting parks to 70 feet. The project as proposed will need to go through, in order for this project to proceed as proposed, there would need to be some change to the parks ordinance or an amendment to it. And that would be is intended to be a public process that we'll go through. And so that will get a separate hearing to then determine if that is correct from a zoning perspective. Commissioners, any comments, thoughts on next steps?
I just wanted to, first of all, thank the public for taking the time to make commentary and to emphasize something that I hope the public understands, which is that we don't have purview on zoning. And so we are offering our best advice on the projects that are brought forward in the format that they're brought forward. And zoning is its own process. And I just want the public to understand that that's not really within our purview. I mean, Seth, you can, comment on that or clarify if I'm misstating that. But I do think that the next steps for the project as proposed, I think you got really good feedback on the stairs, and I think there was some pretty clear ideas about how you might explore the revisions to the massing as it's being put forth by the proponent and the BPDA with their understanding of the zoning process.
So David, thank you for those comments. I really appreciate all the comments we got tonight. If I'm not overstepping, I think we've had a great relationship, collaborative relationship with BPDA Urban Design staff. I think we can take the comments to heart today and work with the staff to develop them. And our hope is to go to full commission as the next step. This project is on a tight timeline. We want to make sure that the housing that is so desperately needed can be provided. And if the commissioners are open to it, I'd just like to put that out there.
I mean, I think you heard some pretty dramatic suggestions as to how you might better improve the approach you've taken, at least the three-part approach that you may be allowed to do under a zoning modification. I'm not sure, given the breadth of what's been stated, that would be a next step. I think probably having it come back to committee makes more sense. I will defer to my fellow commissioners, but we were all over the place in this meeting today in terms of approaches to achieve the outcome you sort of suggested in this Part T. So I'll let other commissioners comment.
I think we all understand the urgency of building housing in this city. As I think at least one of the members of the public commented, when we build something, presumably it is going to be in place for more than 100 years. So I think taking the time to figure out, it's clear that this is a very sensitive site that has implications for a lot of different constituencies. So part of our role is to ensure the best possible outcome, for the public realm, both at the ground and the skyline and at a neighborhood level in this city. And would agree that I think it warrants some more time.
So perhaps what we're suggesting, Brett, is another meeting with subcommittee that's really focused around these massing issues, rather than the stair per se, and with just to narrow the focus. And I think that based on what we've heard, the particularities of this and how sensitive this is, I would agree that it warrants as much close attention as possible. So I would suggest that, and I would to one of the comments that one of the members of the public made, I think it would be important, Seth, that at our next design subcommittee that you do get some enough continuity from those who have reviewed this project, so that when it does come back to full commission, there's a strong consensus.
Thank you for that, David. And I do have to mention that we originally had at least one more, if not two more, commissioners who had seen this previously on this panel, but due to last minute cancellations could not accommodate that.
And just for clarification, what percentage of these units will be affordable?
So there's 400 units and 68 affordable units, so 17%.
Okay, because it's my understanding that that is the most where we need the greatest, where there's the greatest need for housing are affordable units and workforce housing, correct?
Correct. And I'll say also that these units, they're not luxurious units by any standard. They're, tailored more towards the attainable side of Boston housing. There's a building that is built just at the other end of this block, the Bon, that was developed by this group, by this developer. And they have a very unique model in terms of the size of the units to make them calibrated so that they're a more attainable price point than other apartment housing that's able to be built in the city right now.
Thank you.
And I will defer on the architectural side to my colleagues, but I do agree with David that from a landscape open space perspective, I think that the development of the open space and landscape can continue with staff. From my perspective, I think that doesn't need to be discussed at subcommittee again.
Okay.
And I guess I'm sorry to pile on, but I just want to be mindful. I'm just reflecting on the comments from the public because I am aware that BCDC has been reviewing a lot of projects where the height of buildings exceeds zoning. I understand equally there's a lot of pressure to build housing. When I look at the slide of the urban context, I think particularly in respect to the Fenway, it would be interesting to understand, like, where might we be having a similar conversation in the future? Because I also want to be very conscious of the fact that particularly when we are reviewing projects in which there's a big difference from what is proposed, from what is allowable via zoning, you know, to what degree does that set up an expectation or a precedence for future development? And just I would imagine that, you know, part of the role of planning is to anticipate, you know, where we might add additional density. So understanding that context, particularly in light of the planned improvements for the Charlesgate, and improving the connection between the fens and the river will be, you know, that's a major investment that will be made. And, you know, how will future potential development on adjoining parcels, you know, affect that?
Yeah, good point. I think there's some gas station sites that are nearby, for example.
Okay, commissioners, thank you very much for your comments. We will continue to work with the proponent and see you at the next subcommittee.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.
And Seth, I apologize, I have to sign off.
Okay, David, thank you. And I believe we will be joined by Commissioner Love. And if you can just give me a minute to elevate the folks for the next presentation. Okay, and actually I'm going, if you don't mind stopping to share, I need to share for a second. Thank you. Okay, the next project we have is 295 West 1st Street in South Boston. This will be the second presentation of the proposed project to the design subcommittee following an initial presentation at the February 6th monthly meeting, followed by a design subcommittee on March 19th. Of the commissioners assigned to the session, Commissioners Love, Gilly, Smith, and Haseen were present at the most recent BCDC design subcommittee and recommended the project for additional review. These commissioners should be prepared to deliver remarks at the start of the deliberation. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from deliberations, unless I have that incorrect. So with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting when ready. And a reminder that you will have 10 minutes. I will give you a halftime warning and a 1-minute warning. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you again. It's been some time, and we have spent some, I think, really interesting conversations with the urban design group at the BPDA, and I think you will see that in the presentation tonight. Next slide. So we're just going to jump right into it because I know time is short. Just to give you a sense again, a number of you have not seen this presentation. It's in South Boston. It is a through block site between 1st Street and 2nd Street, and also borders on E Street. It's a 10-minute walk from the Broadway T station and a couple of minute walk from, you know, West Broadway itself, and is in a network of, you know, this part of the city obviously has a dearth of open space or gathering spaces. And what you're going to see tonight is an open space that we're proposing. And what you see in this diagram is a series of upcoming proposals that you're going to see that hopefully creates a bigger network of open space. Next slide. So we first came before, you know, the commission, and, you know, this was a building on West 1st Street. It has a dialogue of, you know, 4-story buildings. Our next door neighbor is a 4 to 5-story building, which was 270 West 2nd Street, which we'll refer to a few times. Our site is unique. It's an industrial site. It's contaminated. It's in the floodplain. We have set the building back 18 feet in order to preserve a series of trees that have grown up over the years, mature trees that are a great part of West 2nd Street. And we've tried to create this open space at the corner of West 2nd and East Street because there's an existing, we call it the Foundry. It's almost a 70-foot tall building historically that you can see in the upper right. But this was essentially a 6-story building, 4 and then a setback up to 6. Next slide. We've spent a lot of time with urban design to try to create a more sort of deliberate context on West 2nd Street, meeting our neighbor, at 270 West 2nd Street. I think you can see that with our 5th floor. And we've pushed any of the 6-story to the middle of the site or to West 1st Street. Next slide. And in the upper right-hand corner, comments were made by the commission that it seemed like we had probably 3 vocabularies going on here, and could we resolve that better? Was it too unrelenting along West 2nd Street? So the lower right, you can see what we've done is we've essentially married 2 vocabularies. There's essentially an expression along West 2nd Street, right, which is 4 stories on the left with a setback that matches 270 West 2nd. There's our open space, and then there's this 5 transitioning to 6-story building, which you can see on the right. Next slide. We heard from the commission, they were worried about our open space. Was there enough activation around it? How did the circulation work through it? And there were a thought that our lobby should not be on the northeast corner of the building. We have 2 lobbies, by the way. But shouldn't it be more oriented to the open space? And, people were critical of the fact that the bike room, took up quite a bit of, the frontage along West 1st Street. Next slide. So our proposal tonight is that we've redesigned the open space, and I'll get to that at the end of the presentation. We've brought our main lobby to the open space here on the south side of the building. We have a cafe and a community space, which we see as pods and workstations and things that both the neighborhood and residents will be in all the time, so that this open space is surrounded by activity. The bike space, we moved along East Street, which is clearly a less sort of visible, less trafficked street. And we brought all our community uses along West 1st Street. Frankly, we're in the process, and we're happy to chat with you about the process, but of defining like what would that be. But this is almost 180 feet of frontage, 30 some odd feet deep. How do we carve it up so that it helps provide opportunities for not-for-profits in the neighborhood to come to the site.
And David, you're at halftime.
Okay. A view up and down West 2nd Street. I think you can see on the left that we're pretty successful at fitting into our context. From a streetscape standpoint, the upper right, 18'6" with a 5-foot planting zone is what we have along West 2nd Street, which we think could be very successful. We are in the process working with an arts program in South Boston, about this area where we abut 270 West 2nd. We have some utilities there, but we match the setback of our neighbor, and we will work with artists in the area to mitigate that. Next slide. This is a view looking from, in the upper right, from First Street up through E Street. And you can see the building stepping down from 6 to 5 to the open space. Along E Street, we're at 13'8", again with that 5-foot planting zone. Next slide. And then this is along West First Street. There's a condo building on the right, the gray building. That's 4 stories. 270 West 2nd Street is 5 stories. Our building just to the left is at 6. And again, we have 12-foot 6 as our open space along the street, with all new street trees. Next slide. There was a question earlier about our interior courtyards. You know, you can see that they're a combination of concrete pavers, sedum, and, you know, river rock. The thought is to keep the communal space centered in the space, pulled away 18 feet from, you know, the different units, and abutting our amenity spaces, which I think you can see in the upper right. Go ahead. And, you know, just a couple of quick senses about what that might look and feel like. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, but we got a rock, I guess. You know, just to say, we think of this as in our open space as intergenerational. You know, there's some senior not-for-profits right in the area. And so we have a population to serve. Next slide. There was some real critique about our first, you know, thought about this open space, you know, surrounding it by community use, having a lawn. And the concerns were, was it going to be active or not? You know, is the lawn really well served? Does it really have gathering spaces? Next slide. So we spent some time in the redistribution of the lobby, which you can see. There are now some serious desire lines, right? About how to get to the entrance to the building. This community cafe that we picture, which we've spoken with the neighbors, they welcome a tiny bit of retail in their neighborhood. They don't want a lot, but something like this they think would be great.
David,
So
you have less than a minute.
Okay, it drives the design of where a few access points are. This is the understory idea where it's planted and it has a series of different furniture options. Next slide. But we also heard from the neighborhood that they really needed shade. You know, this is a really tough area of South Boston. Not a lot. It's a big, you know, heat island. Can we give them trees? Next slide. So the thought is, could we provide, you know, something that is, you know, shaded, offers opportunity for different seating and activities, and has, you know, low walls and things that allow people to sit and gather very informally. How did I do, Seth?
You're there. And if I could actually ask you, because I got kicked out of the meeting for a moment, and I believe you are now the official host, so you know you can go rogue and take control if you'd like. But
I'm not ready for that.
If next to your name, there should be some 3 dots when you go over that. If you could see if you can elevate me to host or transfer host.
Seth, would that be me who's sharing my screen, or would
Oh
that be
yeah,
David?
maybe that's you, Robert.
It actually says David got dealt the host hand.
I'm on my dots, my friend, and I don't see any choices.
There should be an option under view, I believe, to show, or where is it? Under view options.
You should be
Side by
looking at this,
side.
Robert, because I don't have these things on my screen. I got mute audio, stop video, blur background. I'm not getting what you're hoping I have.
Is it under the more panel?
At the bottom, do you have something called participants?
I don't have anything at the bottom of, I just have this participant up here.
At the bottom of mine, under more, I've got live broadcast, resort, whiteboard, breakout rooms, pause, stop.
Or anything that says participants and an icon that shows a couple people.
Okay, I got host tools.
Or host tools, maybe you can reassign
Yeah, under
host.
host tools, I've got enable waiting room, share screen, chat, request host to start cloud recording. Wow. View options, request remote control as an alternative. Oh, so maybe you just request control.
Thank you, Barbara. I will try that. I guess I just get remote control of Robert's desktop.
That could work.
So I am going to give up remote control. And apologies for this, everybody. Bear with a few technology kinks due to reliable City Hall internet. Okay, well, let's, while I continue to figure this out, let's open this up for commissioner comment, please.
Can you put up the ground floor plan in terms of the programmatic uses as you go around the site? Okay, so you've animated most of the edges, with the exception of your utilities, right? Is that correct? And what are these community uses? Are those assigned, or are they to be prescribed by the community, or what will happen there in the purple?
I would ask one of our group to get on board, but I would tell you that we have been speaking with the BPDA and with not-for-profits in the area. It's like a chicken egg thing. You know, if we have the space, they'll talk to us seriously, but we are absolutely engaged with, you know, trying to, you know, identify people who need space in the area. And you know, frankly, it can't be retail today. Can we all just agree with that? And, you know, even it got built, you know, 18 months from now or something, it would be tough to do retail on that area. So we think the only way to activate it, quite frankly, is with, you know, something that's community related. But we're absolutely committed to doing it.
Okay. So I'll just make the comment. First of all, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the objective of animating all three edges. I worry a little bit about the stretch of bike space on East Street. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's very important that you do activate the sidewalk, you know, with uses and activities and real programming, especially say along West First Street, where it's half the block that, you know, will be either animated or empty, depending on what you do. Certainly applaud you for the corner of West Second and East Street. I think that's a wonderful solution. I think if I were going to try and make sure there was a retail use, I'd probably try to figure out how to activate that park plaza, but in addition to the lobby space. But those are my comments about sort of the public realm as I understand it from what you put up here. So I'll pass to one of my fellow commissioners.
Maybe I'll pick it up from there, Kirk, because I think that the planning strategies have much improved from the last time we saw this. I think the larger lobby is in the right location with this community cafe facing that open space at the corner of West 2nd and East Street. You know, and I definitely think it's appropriate to have a lobby on First Street, but the you know, priority, the majority, I meant to say majority of the neighborhood really is toward West Broadway. And so I do think that creating the lobby for the residents of this building is now in the right location. So that's a great improvement. I do see West First a little bit challenging, but I do think, you know, there's exciting changes, hopefully coming sooner rather than later, with all of the development that's happening, you know, page north of your site, of the site. So I do think it will come. I am curious if there are any other amenity spaces, though, in the building that you have on a second level. We haven't really seen plans above this level, and I'm just curious, is there a fitness, you know, room, for instance, that's on an upper level, or maybe that's just not a programmatic element in this building? Can you give us a little bit more insights onto what
Robert,
else
can
is?
you take us quickly to to that level? So this is the second level. So we have an amenity space that essentially overlooks the park on one side, you know, where we see that as common rooms and fitness that overlooks the park on the sort of lower right. But it also, that it is literally just a common corridor, has access to the courtyard. And then on the left-hand side, there's another sort of, we think of as a common room that would allow access, right, to the courtyard number 2, right? So that's the thought, is we have amenity spaces adjacent to both of them, and also, you know, overlooking the park.
Yeah, I was just wondering if one of those amenity spaces could help fill out that stretch along East Street, but it wouldn't be feasible to put bikes on the second level. So I understand that. Can you give us a little, the courtyard got subdivided, and I do worry about what that internal space is going to be like. Have you done any analysis? Maybe just walk us through these drawings. And I'm going to be super transparent. I was trying to get Seth to be the host, and I missed these slides. So you could just give us a little bit of, give me a little bit of update on what happened to the courtyard.
By courtyard, Mimi, do you mean this level, or do you mean the front?
Yeah, Robert, can you?
What we're looking at, we're
Okay.
looking down into courtyard 1 and 2.
Let's zoom in on the plan on the upper right, Robert, if we could. Is there any way to do that?
It used to be one space, and I assume this is all
Right.
above the garage level.
Yeah, so this was how we resolved how to pull the building back away from West 2nd Street, so that it became almost, the 6-story building became sort of a West 1st Street building. In order to do that, I mean, we went from 252 units to 240 units. So, you know, there was a change in the program. And then, you know, we have these 2 spaces that are, you know, minimum 70 by 50 on the left and, you know, 65 by 50 on the right. These are not light wells. I mean, they're, you know, they're decent courtyards, you know. But truthfully, you know, we did have a much larger interior courtyard, truthfully, you know, the last time, but it was a sort of this conversation about how to manage that 6th floor and how to erode it. And so this is the compromise. That's what you're looking at, Mimi.
Got it. So the massing is now facing on First Street. You have a lower massing on Second Street, and the result of that is
that the
you have to put
courtyards,
units
we went
somewhere.
from, yeah, we do have a diagram where you can see, right, so there we have 2 courtyards. If you skip back one, Robert, it was one much larger courtyard, right? I mean, that's where we were, and that's what the 6-story, you know, expression brings you. But working with urban design, it felt like, next slide, you know, pushing the 6th floor back off of, you know, West Second was the move. And just to say, you know, I sat through, you know, the last presentation. This is a transition site. Obviously, it's 3- and 4-story buildings, you know, heading north from, you know, Broadway. Then there's this strip between 2nd and 1st Street, you know, where there's a series of different heights around 70 feet-ish. And then across 1st Street, there's, you know, it probably goes even a little taller. So we are this kind of transitional site. And so that's the conversation with urban design, was how do we get the building to actually reflect that transition?
And just to reinforce what David mentioned, is that through our conversations, we determined that though we appreciate and liked the simplicity of the previous diagram, that of paramount importance was to keep the project to 5 stories along West 2nd Street, particularly with the neighbors immediately across the street, and then step up to 6 stories on West 1st Street. Should be noted that this corridor between 1st and 2nd Street is zoned, I believe, down at 35 feet, if I'm remembering correctly, or 40. But neighboring projects, like you see on the one on the left here, have been approved up to 5 floors consistently throughout this area in the last few years, with that step back that you see for the 4th floor. So we felt that the threshold for approaching this in terms of what was perceived as a 5-story building versus a 6-story building was, you know, make sure that from the public realm along the 2nd Street side, it was 5 stories, whereas along the 1st Street side, it could present as 6 stories.
Yeah, and Seth, I think that's super appropriate, especially along 2nd Street, where it really is, you know, a smaller scale housing stock. And so that feels right. I guess for me, the question is, you know, is it worth looking at even more height along 1st Street to allow a bigger courtyard? But I'm sure that comes into complications with high-rise code and et cetera. But it was that looked at. Could you do?
Yeah, honestly, that's really just about trying to keep us, you know, out of, you know, out of a different building technology. That's all, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm laughing, but I'm actually not laughing. I mean, the feasibility of, you know, financing all this stuff is, you know, I know you hear people beat that drum beat all the time, but to the greatest extent we can, we're trying to keep it, you know, as a fairly straightforward building technology, just to say.
I just add, you know, is just to build upon Mimi's comment, is there, because it looks like what you're doing is you're trading off, and I completely support the idea of creation of public space. You're trading off, kind of eroding a corner of the building, and as a result, losing.
Sorry, I'm losing my.
We're squeezing a tube of toothpaste. It goes someplace.
Yeah.
It
Can
goes
you?
someplace.
Sorry,
right?
go ahead. I'm not sure if you can hear me now. I just lost my AirPods.
We can hear you.
But
Anne-Marie,
that's,
can you hear us? While Anne-Marie is trying to come
Can you
back.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can't.
You can't hear us.
Go ahead.
I'm going to jump in while Anne-Marie is trying to connect. I'm really, I understand the courtyard discussion. However, I really want to focus primarily on the public realm of the project. Can we go back to the plan and then we'll move to the park at the, so I certainly agree that the moving the main lobby and the community cafe to bracket this open space on the corner was the right direction. One of the things that I don't think we talked about, maybe we did, in previous presentations, was the significance of you wrapping the parking on all sides, which I think is, I think there's some challenges in activating some of the spaces, but I think that that's much less challenging than activating a parking podium coming right out to the street. So I wanted to give you credit for that. I know that in a previous presentation, you had one of your potential community partners present. So I believe that you are actively speaking with people. I personally think that the shifting away from a lawn to a more urban space is much more successful and usable, and I think has come quite a long way. I think the concern with the lawn for me was that the scale, and it was just too sort of flat and exposed to be used. So creating it more as still a very green public space with shade and places to still relax in less formal ways, like the seat wall as well as the tables and chairs was a very good move. I also I think the generosity of the streetscape on all sides is a strong element too. And so really the challenges, and I think sort of an artsy, edgy approach might be needed for the bike room and the community space along West 4th Street. But at the ground level, I think this has come quite a long way in the development of the public realm at the ground level.
But Shauna, there were a couple of proposals that he shared on the corner. Was there one that you thought was better, or am I
Did you
missing that point?
Did you share a couple of proposals, David? Maybe I missed it. I think one was
this was more suggesting that we wanted to explain it. The tree canopy was very important, but this was really more about like what's happening at the ground plane.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, sure, tree canopy, obviously it's there, blah blah blah. But if you really get down to it, where is the usable space, sittable space, and we really believe this might be one of these spaces where you might want to have an event, or you might want to be able to do something, and so we wanted to have this opportunity to have not just relying on the community cafe, but if the neighborhood had an event, was there enough hardscape to actually accommodate it? So that's what we're balancing with this. This is kind of the understory plan, right? Things that are less than 3 or 4 feet high, right? Where we create these series of meeting places or respites where people can gather, and just to make sure that we have the right scale, where it's not meant for large scale gatherings, but could you do small groups? Sure. Right.
And David, I think key to that is that it does kind of need to be under 3 foot, occasional floor, but we don't want it to feel like it's screened away from the street.
Right.
So I think the 2 layers are of the the understory and the canopy.
That was the thinking.
Can we look at one of the perspective views on West 2nd? There's kind of an expression of townhouses, and I just wanted to make sure I understood what. Yeah, I think there's a closer one. It is as it approaches your neighboring building. but is that a
So
correct
Mimi, the
reading?
thought
Yeah.
is that, you know, that the expression on the building has these bay elements.
Mhm.
You know, we have different, we could go back to the plans in more detail, but we have some certain plan typologies that are actually longer, you know, deeper. And so we use them to create sort of a 18 or 24-foot bay expression on the side of the building. It occurs here in a couple of places. And Robert, if you can, you know, go back to that.
Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, just here, you see a couple of them on the, you know, on the open space, but to the left, that expression actually continues down the street so that these kind of what we think of as almost full height, you know, bay expressions, there's, you know, 3 more of them as it goes down the street so that we, you know, at some level bring residential scale to this 4-story, you know, facade that we have.
Yeah, and I do think that that articulation helps with the scale of the street. Perhaps maybe I'm just thinking of a material, you know, is there a different material strategy? Because on the one hand, all of this is starting to render like brick, but I don't believe that's what it's noted in the
No,
presentation.
no, this is predominantly fiber cement and you know, along West First Street, there's some metal panel on those bay elements, but this is, you know, lap siding and panel in fiber cement panel. So, you know, previously this was all sort of one color and, you know, Bill Ron obviously maybe not so obviously said that's a little relentless, you know, can you do something about that? And so, you know, that's what brought about some of these color changes. You know, we could look at, you know, on the left-hand side of this, you know, lower image, you know, could we do some more panel and less, you know, clapboard to bring more relief? Sure, we'd be happy to explore those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, the window organization is clear. I don't think it needs to get any fussier of anything, you know, it just needs to be further simplified. I think it could just be more looking at material strategies. Um, and I certainly not sure that trying to match the brick is the right color or this darker color is right. And so maybe thinking about other ways to use the materials
Sure.
differently is a good next step. Anne Marie, did your
Yeah, sorry,
back? Oh, good.
apologize for the audio issues on my end. I mean, overall, I like the direction the architecture is taking. It feels I maybe not so much this view, but some of the other views. It feels I think the way you're addressing the massing and providing some relief while also letting the building have some of its own identity makes sense. The comment I was going to make earlier, which is a little bit more, you know, is a bigger step, was just in response maybe to your concern about breaking down the scale of that inner courtyard, was that is there, you know, in your exploration of various massing studies of this site, was there an option where maybe rather than pulling off, eroding a corner of the building, you kind of opened up that the public space would actually be kind of part of the courtyard itself. So I guess I'm imagining like an inverted U shape where the public space faces East Street, so that you can regain that corner that you eroded away, and that the public space is not the entire courtyard, but maybe a first portion of the courtyard. You know, then it would be more sheltered. It would, assuming I'm looking at the map correctly, maybe be oriented to the south. I'm just trying to think, you know, one of the things that I've always valued about courtyard buildings is that, you know, the quality of that space, particularly in a city, it becomes a little bit of an oasis. So, you know, is that you're certainly, you know, certainly the architectural team is more familiar with the details, but that's just one question that emerged in my mind.
Yeah, and you know, for us, this, you know, naturally became this we sort of came to this organically, you know, talking with the neighbors. I mean, we're raising the intersection at E and, you know, Second Street to make it more accessible, make the open space more accessible. The Foundry, which is that block building to the right, you know, it's a historic building, you know, shows up in our renderings. I mean, it's 70 feet tall and it's, you know, it's pretty strong in that corner. It's got 10-foot sidewalks, has no trees. And we actually, this became a, kind of a foundational thing, which is like how to help the neighborhood deal with something that's been there a long time, right? Which is this kind of block building, and how could we help it feel a little better scaled? And that's what really led us to, you know, can we create an open space that gives a little bit more light and air, you know, to that building, setting our building back 55 feet. And then, you know, frankly, from the neighborhood standpoint, we got here because it felt very easy for them to get there. So we didn't really push very hard in the direction that you're talking about. I'll be honest with you.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to mention that, you know, it was very much a priority of the BPDA, given that this is, you know, over half of a block project, that the sidewalks, you know, be generous, and there's a real focus on the public realm here. And the proponent did, you know, truly step back, as you can tell in this image, right? The facade and the ground level along Second, East Street, and First, right? Two complete street standards and then some.
And I want to be clear, I was not advocating to take that back. I was just sort of looking at other options in terms of creating a generous public space.
Sure.
And I just want to make sure I was not advocating to
Yeah.
give up that back.
Understood.
Okay, I just have one last comment, and it really shows on the last slide of your presentation, the thank you. I think, you know, if we are starting to feel comfortable with the massing and this corner open space, having it be more of a destination than the previous lawn design, I think that it's really now about the architectural details. You know, I do wonder if like a arcade type architecture really makes sense, but let's just say it's a nice covered space. Then it's about, is the articulation of the columns the right strategy with the surrounds of brick at the base and the arches? I feel like it's hard to know because the trees are so dominant in this view that I can't really see what's happening. But it feels like one more refinement at really thinking about the tectonics of your final solution should happen. One more pass at it. Like, I'm not really sure what those arched elements are, you know, the supporting brackets are they really right for this type of architecture, for instance? Those are details. I don't know that we have to get involved, but I do think that working with the BPDA staff on those items would make this a even better project.
We're happy to work with Seth and his crew. I mean, we've been back and forth for the last 6 weeks, so we know we're not done having that conversation. So we'd be happy to work through those details.
David and I recently met, but he knows me so well already. Commissioner, should we see if there's any public comment? And a reminder, we do have one more project after this one. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, at this time, we'd like to invite any member of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. So are there any public comments? Okay. Seeing none, I will stop sharing and turn it back to the commissioners. Any comments, or in lieu of a formal vote, would we like to see if this is recommended for final consideration?
I mean, I'll just say that I think they addressed some of the planning, concerns that we have. I think the massing with the 5 stories on Second Street and the taller volume on First Street, I think all of those items are working well. I think the open space at the corner also, was responsive to some comments that we had the last time or the last 2 times. So I think all of the bigger moves are fine. I think it's down to the little details. And I think, as I said, I am fine, assuming that they're going to continue to work with BPDA staff on those items, in addition to material choices and color selections. I do want the BPDA, though, to really worry about the quality of spaces in those courtyards. I know it's not public realm, but it is still quality of space for the people living in those units. That's my thought.
I would agree. I would support that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does, if there were more flexibility in the massing, things like bringing the courtyards to the street edge to activate that, are strategies we've seen before. But it does seem to be a trade-off that we don't have enough details on moving, a portion of the roof to a higher elevation, or to get a different presentation of the courtyard to the street and to the public realm. But those are ideas that would be fine. But given what we have and what we're looking at, I'm comfortable if that is the limitation, and I can only defer Seth to tell us that you've pressed and prodded enough with the Play-Doh that there's nowhere to get more.
Yeah, I think, Kirk, with the inclusion of that corner open space, right, that it winds up being a big trade-off there.
Right.
Okay, so
Shauna, you're muted, Shauna.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention, I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think I'm comfortable with the project working with staff. I think that looking at the tectonics also could extend to the landscape as well. But I'm comfortable with the larger spatial moves and concepts.
The only last thing I would say, Seth, is that these evolving areas, it's sort of, we all know the trade-offs and detailing and durability and materials, all which are in your purview, become so important, because eventually the neighborhoods grow up around the places, and the places still have to be as excellent as they can be. So I'm sure staff can achieve that, but it is important. So I second Mimi and others' comments in that regard on details and materiality.
okay, understood. We will continue working with the proponent on that in anticipation of coming back for a final vote. Or sorry, final consideration. Thank you to the proponent. And I think, David, I was able to re-establish host authority. So I don't need to ask you to host the rest of the meeting anymore.
I'm off the hook.
Yeah, you're about to get put on the spot.
I was going to run the rest of your meeting. That was going to be a problem.
Exactly. So thank you very much, and let us move on to the next presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to sign off. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anne-Marie.
See you, Anne-Marie.
I'm just going to elevate the team. Wait 1 second. Okay, Next up is Franciscan Children's Hospital, IMP, both 80D and 80B in Brighton. This will be the third presentation of the project to the design subcommittee following an initial presentation in October 2023, followed by design committee meetings on January 16 and February 20th, 2024. Of the commissioners assigned to this session, Commissioners Love, Gilly Smith, and Sykes were present at the most recent BCDC design subcommittee and recommended the proposed project for additional review. These commissioners should be prepared to deliver their remarks at the start of the deliberation. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves. Please let me know if that is not the case, and otherwise I will stop sharing and invite the team to begin presenting whenever ready. Please remember that you have a 10-minute presentation time. I will give you a halftime and 1 minute warning. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. This is the third presentation of Franciscan Children's Institutional Master Plan and Large Project Review. Next slide, Crystal. We're really just going to focus on the master plan today. I think based on the last two meetings, we took a step back and really have come up with a different approach to the site, which makes it a much more site-focused project. While there may be some suggested building massing, we're really not focused on the building at all, really just the new approach to the site. Slide. Just some sort of reminder of where we are. We're on Warren Street in Brighton. Franciscan Children's is a large campus that's surrounded by other large institutional buildings, including Brighton High School, Brighton Marine, as well as Boston Greed Academy and to the southwest, St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. Just some aerial views of the campus. You can see just the size and shape of the surrounding buildings along Warren Street. One thing to note, and this slide does show it reasonably well, is that the buildings along Warren Street, the larger buildings, are kind of set back off Warren Street, which was a comment that had come up previously that we're going to talk to. Slide. This is the view from Com Ave, which again just shows the sort of height and scale of the buildings in the area. So we're really in a mix of different institutions with a residential area that starts to develop on the north side of the site. These are some streetscapes. The existing Warren Street urban realm is not one I think that you would want today. There really are no street trees. It's a 7-foot wide concrete sidewalk. And we do have a large segment of Warren Street as our frontage. So there's a real opportunity to do something with the urban realm as part of this specific project. Next slide. Just views back the other way and just some other context for you. And you can see on the bottom right image, that's Brighton Marine, and you can see it sits back up on a hill with effectively a front yard. And a lot of the institutions have that kind of feel. Next slide. And then just touching on, we do have frontage on Cambridge Street. This is the Kennedy Rock Conservation Area that was talked about last time. And we just wanted to show some photographs of it just to orient, just that it is boulders and cliffs and really an inaccessible area of the site, just for reference. Slide. This is the overall campus. The campus was actually built in approximately sort of 1950. And it was a convalescent home for children. The buildings are really not fit for purpose for Franciscan Children's Hospital, which provides really complex healthcare. The buildings are not accessible. The floor plates are not sized correctly for the functions. And so the need really is to actually develop a really large intervention on this site to really provide the type of building that they need to provide the really complex care that they provide today. This is where we were. So the idea was that we were taking down what was called Building 7 and building a proposed building on Warren Street that really was close to the urban realm. And you can see from the axonometric view in the top left, really a large building that is scaled more with the buildings across the street than it is with the campus. It was creating just some significant issues relative to the overall approach. So the goal was to step back and look at that. The feedback we got was review alternative building massing due to the scale of the clinical building on Warren Street. The relationship between this new large footprint building with large column bays and the existing more almost residential scale campus, and then greater consideration to the arrival point landscape design. What we've done is we've actually taken a really big step in a different direction, which really was to respond directly to this feedback. Next slide. So you can see our original site on the west side of the site up against Warren Street. We do have an open area that was a parking lot on the east side of the site. It is not large enough to do the complete footprint of the building that we need without it being a very tall building. But what we've done is we've sort of looked at that and said, how can we use that site in an effective way to get the building in a different location? So the idea is that we're going to build the project in 2 phases. So basically a phase 1 building. Next slide. Phase 2, with the idea being that gives us the floor plate we need to actually also reduce the height of what was the prior scheme. So the prior scheme was a 6-story building. We're basically reducing it to a 4-story building. Next slide. These are just a quick sort of animation of sort of how this would develop in phases. So Crystal, if you want to just click through. So phase 1, we actually use the programs that are in building 5 in the circle. We actually are building in phase 1 so that we can take down building 5. Build phase 2. And at that point, we've actually done something that was beyond the IMP master plan, which is we're able to take all the buildings down and open up the complete site and really build what is the future state of the campus, which we weren't getting to in the 10-year IMP previously. And so it's just as a comparison, so the existing site plan, you can see just
and Martin, sorry, you're a little over halfway.
Okay, site coverage, our prior scheme, and then this proposed new scheme. And with this new scheme, we actually have 25% more open space that is asphalt and buildings. So we're basically opening up the site and it becomes a landscape master plan. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Peru at Copley Wolf to talk about the actual overall site approach.
Thanks, Martin. So the approach is really to take advantage of the positive things that's on the site, such as Kennedy Rock, and somehow draw that into the site, making a good visual connection through the site as you come up from the green line of ComAv. So concentrate on a larger green space in front of the building, and that will help mitigate runoff and really make that green connection through the site, because the green that actually exists across the street, although green, is relatively inert in regards to interaction with the public realm. Let me just go to the next one. So what this is showing is actually the public realm, as Martin explained with those photographs, is effectively an 8-foot wide concrete sidewalk. Even though the south side of the street has that large green space, it's not accessible from a topographic access, and it's also fenced off. So what we're doing, we're creating a 16-foot wide public realm with a 14-foot wide additional green buffer, because parking is a part of the reality on this site, and we'll develop a green strategy for that parking lot, which will then drain and feed into the water mitigation area to the right, with a series of rain gardens that can be interactive and informative to both the users of the site as well as the general public. And as you can see, draw that green space into the back of the site, so we can take the amenities for the play space and for the therapy gardens, drawing its energy from the Kennedy Rock Reserve. Part of the circulation would be to also provide a connection for the general public from Cambridge Street, from a bus stop that's on that edge through the site up to Warren Street. So if they need to get to, say, the Green Line or Brighton Marine or Brighton High School, it's a bit of a shortcut through the site. Next one. The circulation diagram is really to segregate the service from vehicles from pedestrians. So there's a series of raised pedestrian crossings through the site along the pedestrian realm of the public way. All the sidewalks are raised, not only there, but also through the site itself. Reserve the periphery of the site for deliveries and the inner core just for drop off and parking. A lot of it will be valet. So the valet, if you pull up to the front door of the children's hospital, they will take your car and put it in short-term accessible or into the parking lot itself. And the Kennedy Day School will be able to operate independently. There's some general sections showing through the parking lot, how there's a series of double treed or triple treed alleys through the site that connects the two different entities of the Kennedy Day School along with the Children's Hospital extension.
Jim, you have a minute.
All right. And then one through the mitigation area. And this shows an extension of an expansion of the pedestrian realm, showing that 16-foot wide pedestrian zone, along with a green strip along the Warren Street and the extra buffer. Images probably speak for themselves. The main features of the promenade connecting the different entities, the Kennedy Day School and the Children's Hospital. We're going to bring some nature-based inspired sculpture onto the site. And the green parking lot will have a series of different strategies to make it as non-suburban as possible. And then probably the middle center photograph at the top shows an example of a mitigated wetland in front of a cancer center that we did. So that would be a similar sort of approach to this front door of the Children's Hospital.
And Jim, please wrap up.
There you go.
All right, we're just these are just a couple of site sections that just show the relative height that's being proposed to Camelot Court. Thank you, Crystal. And again, where we were, this is the image that we showed previously. Next slide. And this is the proposed, and you can see just the scale and the height and proportions of the building are much similar, more similar to the adjacent buildings. Setback off the side. And with that, we'll open it up.
Okay, commissioners. Thank you, team.
I'll start and say, wow, this is exciting. Martin, I know that the last couple of meetings I've been involved in, I think we pushed you, hopefully you agree in a good direction. I really think that this is definitely an exciting to see, not only near-term possibilities, but really long-term possibilities of where the site becomes, primarily a open green space. So I think this is great. I just have maybe one or two questions. One question is in phase one, what sets the setback from Commonwealth? If I'm getting the street
From
right.
Warren.
Yeah, Warren, yes. Just out of curiosity, what sets that?
Yeah, if you go all the way back, we haven't fully placed the building yet, but there is a residential house that is that sort of little piece of the site that looks cut out right on Warren Street that we're trying to not be too close to, and it does choke down a little bit there, and so from that, and we need to maintain access to building 4 during construction as well. So there's a couple of parameters that are doing that, but we haven't finalized exactly the siding of the building yet, which is, I think, why we didn't, want to show any massing or anything at this point.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Yeah, and we're trying to keep about a 15-foot setback to the existing buildings that remain, because one of the things that we're dealing with here is that they can't shut down, obviously, while this is being constructed. So all of the programs and all of the kids that are being served in the existing buildings will continue to be, the campus will continue to operate during construction. So there are some sort of, we're trying to be careful about how much we're impacting the existing buildings as we're building.
Sure. And the neighbors. I think now,
Yep.
you know, we need to think about how are we impacting the neighbors. And I know you have some really good setbacks. Are there any topography changes from?
Yes, there actually. When you go to this site section, Crystal, you really zoom past it. So the topography changes you can see on the bottom section, which is sort of, it shows Brighton Marine across the street on the right, and then it's the hillside of Brighton Marine, Warren Street, onto our site, our building, and then you can see that there's actually a rise and a cliff face, and there's actually a whole series of mature trees. So we are pretty well protected, and that sort of was one of the concepts of bringing this down to 4 stories versus 6. Where we were on the street was that we're trying to keep it as low as possible, obviously because we're in a part of the site that is closer to the residential area behind us. It is fairly well screened.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of positive moves that have been made here, and so I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, I wanted to jump into it. It was also a sort of pleasant shock to open up the drawings and see the building moved away from that very tight relationship to the street. And Jim, I think that you have a lot of landscape to work with. I think one of could we go to possibly a site plan? I think that and that's absolutely, you know, glorious to have so much open space to work with. I think the development of the specific gardens is going to be pretty significant. And I guess the biggest challenge is, how do we give the street some level of a feeling of activation, particularly with, you know, with parking taking up such a big chunk of it. I'm wondering if there's some, and I don't have any suggestions, but if there's some way to incorporate a level of program in that buffer area, if it requires shifting things around a little bit, either, you know, landscape focused program, but something to kind of create this whole thing as an adventure and a series of events, which you can definitely see the potential in the connection to. I love the idea of a rock reserve, but the potential of the kids' play space, the therapy garden, the water mitigation garden, I would create that as some type of event as well. But is there a landscape event that can go into that buffer area, and would the geometry need to shift to accommodate that?
Yeah, we in the sections that in your package, you'll see that we're already looking at some low seat walls and some sort of interventions that way, because there are some grades for us to negotiate and to create extra buffering from the pedestrian realm. So we're going to continue to develop that as the grades are understood a little bit more.
It might even need more. It might need some sort of architectural canopies or structures or something, just to kind of create a street edge that doesn't just disappear.
Sean, are you done?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. No, I think that's a great point. Like Mimi and Sean, I think I also applaud you for this move to move the mass away from the road, and I'm sure you'll take it further to integrate green where you can on the facade in some manners, and roofs and whatever's visible from Marine, Brighton Marine and other places. But I agree with Shauna in terms of activating Warren Street, and I worry a bit because Warren Street is rather bare on the other side as well. And we end up with this rather long stretch of really just car centric and, you know, buffered by green on either side. And so whether I would encourage you to think about that buffer zone in terms of kiosks and push carts and, you know, things that might attract people. And I don't know where they would come from exactly other than the hospital, but that could be one source. And then, you know, that sort of begs the question of whether that last tray of parking is really, whether that will be needed to activate that edge, meaning where it says buffer, just the single loaded, well, it's double loaded, but the street edge side of that might be worth looking about how you activate part of that in lieu of cars if that's necessary. I don't know that it is, but I just think that trees may not be enough, and they certainly to create a sense of safety and comfort and activity and passive surveillance and all the things that are not suburban. So that's probably my biggest concern at this point, is just what does the street edge feel like and how are you really going to activate it? So otherwise, I agree with everything else that's been said.
Okay, any additional commissioner comments, or should we open for public?
Open
Public
up.
comment.
Yeah.
Okay. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. Is there any public comment? Okay, I see one from Barbara Jin.
Thank you, Mr. Reisman. Mr. Hero, I want to commend you on this new plan. It is much improved. And I particularly like to thank you for being responsive to neighborhood comment. Typically, BPDA projects just run over any citizen who says boo to them. I'd also like to thank Commissioner Smith and Love for their hard work on this project. I'm really very much encouraged. I think the additional green space, not only for a sick child, but for a child who's maybe making their first contact with medical professionals, and certainly for the parents, the very anxious parents of sick children, the additional green space adds a buffer of peace. And I just want to thank you so very much. I'll continue observing this project. And again, kudos. I think you did a cracked up job here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do I see any public? No, I think that concludes the public commentary of this project. And based on comments to date, unless commissioners have additional comments, and in lieu of a formal vote, it's my understanding that the proposed project is likely recommended for additional review at Design Subcommittee.
Yeah, I would just say, I'd encourage you to think of some typologies for the street edge that you might bring to subcommittee. And, you know, I think about some of the structures in the Wharf District in DC, you know, small structures for either neighborhood serving uses or neighborhood retail or seasonal uses, or, you know, just things that, so the site identity could really be defined at the street edge, partially by the way you activate it with things that will attract people to that portion of the site. I'd encourage you to really do a little research into that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kirk. I think you may need that extra space to be able to do something that really feels somewhat urban with, you know, incorporating hardscape. I also, Jim, in looking at the, you know, the water collection space, I'm a little worried about the quietness of that space paired with the quietness of the buffer space. So thinking of that, some of the magic of these sort of healing gardens, even if it isn't for the kids, but for the the public at large, is there a way to kind of really create that as a somewhat, it might be a somewhat passive activated space, but in also incorporating some of the things that Kirk was talking about, because I think that now it's an exciting challenge. It's how can landscape be the protagonist in the urban protagonist in this project, and that's I think that's pretty fun to work with.
Good comment.
And yeah, and seasonality. I mean, you've got enough room for a skating rink on top of your irrigation in the winter, so it doesn't, just sit there and people stare at it. Things like that. Anyway.
Well, luckily we have a person on our team too who actually lives just around the corner from the site and passes by it all the time. So he'll be able to give us some candid, real-time thoughts on how to activate that space, because Warren Avenue is a rather suburban, inert, cut-through street, and it needs all the help it can get in regards to activation. So I appreciate those comments.
And would I be characterizing things correctly, commissioners, if I said that at next design subcommittee, we would like to see the site plan further advanced based on the comments here tonight, as well as an introduction of the architecture of the building?
Agreed.
Great. Well, thank you very much to the project team, for everybody who joined us tonight, and especially to the commissioners for your continued time and counsel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks for your help.
Good night.
Good night.